Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This is our second Zoom session on the coronavirus management in Germany and the EU. This is a series of talks which is initiated by the German Embassy and the EU-Delegation in Tel Aviv, which is aimed at exploring and learning about the challenges, realities, strengths, and weaknesses in the wake of COVID-19. Again, I please urge you or offer you or invite you to participate and send any questions or comments you might have during this talk, and we will try to answer them. Our second talk will be dedicated to the administrative perspective. For many months, Germany has been praised as a COVID-19 hero. In the past few weeks, I think that image has slightly diminished in the second lockdown, but we will hear a lot more about that from our distinguished experts and guests who are joining us today. And I'm happy to welcome Rahel Schomaker and Jana Otto from the German University of Administrative Sciences, SPER. They work on a project. Their work is part of a project called Knowledge and Idea Transfer for Innovation in Administration, WITI, which is based at the German University of Administrative Sciences at SPER. And they will soon be telling us about it. Hi, good morning.
Good morning, Tal. Many thanks for having us. Many thanks for inviting us. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. Let's start with what I call a traditional elevator pitch. So if each one of you can describe, in 2 minutes, as if I was meeting you on the elevator. Who are you? What are you doing? And specifically, what have you been doing in the past few months in the wake of the COVID-19 virus?
So, Jana, do you want?
Yeah. Hello, also from me. I'm very happy to be here. And I'm Jana Otto, and I'm a research assistant at the University of Speyer and working in the project called WITI. And in this project, we started to analyze the effects of the refugee crisis between 2015 and 2017. And in our study, we asked basically how the German administration at the local level successfully innovate to challenge the crisis. And at the moment, also public administration suffers from the COVID-19 outbreak. And during 2020, we now ask at the local level how they challenge the crisis. And we ask what drives successful administration performance during crisis, and we compare lessons from the refugee migration crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think the favorite insight of our work is that the public administration mastered the crisis with the use of networks, and that they learned also from the challenge of the refugee crisis.
Rahel?
Yeah, so my name is Rahel Schomaker. I'm a professor for public administration economics in Germany and Austria. And so I've been doing a lot of work on the Middle East also. So I've been fascinated by crisis anyway. So to see in how far people cope with exceptional conditions, so for at an institutional level, of course, also. So what we did, and this is the overall, Jana already introduced it, the overall idea behind this project, to find joint patterns, not only for Germany or Austria, but also, of course, in a comparative way, see what makes administrations resilient against crisis. So, and also tackling not only the administration as an institution, but also the interplay with the civil society, with the political level. Because what we see is it is not only the technical management, but also like accountability, which lies in the situation, just getting people on board or connecting the administration with the political level to manage things efficiently. So this has been under research so far. And crisis, this is not good news, but I think it's true, crisis will come again and again. So once we learn from crisis in the past, we are better prepared for the future, just building this resilience. So this is a background, and I think this is something pretty important on a societal level also.
So yeah, so I want to ask both of you, with your expertise of how the German administration handles crises. At least from Israel, it has seemed that Germany has been getting like extremely high grades on its dealing with the crisis, and at least up until last month, persistently the infection and death rates were lower than other countries in Europe. So what would you say is the secret of success? Is it the experience? Is it the level of trust? But like, if you would have to say one, of course there are many secrets to success, but one main component of why the administration has been, or at least portrayed as a successful, maybe it's not as successful, but it has been portrayed as such.
So I would say, if I might jump in, it has been both. First, of course, surely Germany has a good health system, so you can explain a part of the low death rates, things like that, you can explain with a very good health system. So, and this is not by chance, but this is not really in the core of administrative behavior. So this, of course, contributed, and the overall high development grade of the economy. So this for sure is true. Second, I would say, of course, initial conditions in the administration matter. And this is, if we compare countries now, we see the initial conditions. What are the resources behind? How good is the training? So the overall capacity of the administrations matter. So I would say this really contributed here. You mentioned the level of trust, and interestingly, we have another project which is tackling trust. So I would also say, but this is just an informed guess, trust matters. If it comes to compliance, of course, to the measures, I'm not sure if that was this is true, but I'm not sure if that was really a driver in the first wave. I think this may be more, or will become more important in the second wave, and how far people comply. So
Jana, we're now in this, everyone is in the midst of the second wave, and Germany did enter its second lockdown. A, can you please tell us what is currently restricted? And B, how much is the public complying during this second wave? Here in Israel, the second wave raised many questions of public and political contention that did not exist in the first one. So how is it in Germany?
Yeah, at the beginning of the first lockdown, the administrative action was quite uniform, and this voluntary homogeneousness was probably the effect of the uncertainty of the situation during the first weeks. And now in the second lockdown, the trend away from a uniform response is currently emerging. And probably this uniform response is also the reason why we had a lot of trust in what the administration and the government was doing in the first lockdown, and now it's getting a little bit lower. So there is still a high compliance in Germany, but there are also some demonstrations in some cities against the new restrictions. But there's still a high trust in Germany. And actually, public life is restricted. All restaurants, sports studios, cinemas are closed at least until December. And I think everything is closed except for shops and the education system and work. And it's only allowed to meet at the moment with one other household in private and in public. And in shops and schools, people have to wear mouth and nose protection masks. But yeah, as I said, it's still, I think, a high compliance in Germany.
And there's a question that we got from one of our viewers, which was supposed to be my next question anyway. So it's making it easy. Great minds think alike. The question is the crisis managed at the federal level or locally? And I want to ask, is it level locally, and what is the division of responsibilities and authorities, and how smooth is it working between the federal and local level?
So, I mean, this to a high degree depends on the political system of Germany. We have federation, so in its Article 30 of the Constitution of the Grundgesetz said, well, the states are responsible for a lot. So also here we see the single states, Bundesländer, are responsible. So, and it is the federal level that takes oral action. And now, let's say for the second lockdown, the lockdown light, it was in third directive for the new COVID measures. And this is done on a federal level. The states are responsible, and of course it is a municipal level which is responsible for the execution in the narrow sense.
But who decides, for instance, like just on the most practical level, who decides if you want to close down or put a curfew, even on a certain specific neighborhood, because there's been an outbreak in a neighborhood? So that's a decision. So where is the jurisdiction? Where's the line of jurisdiction?
So it's split between the federal level and the state. So the overall regulation comes from the federal level, but it is a state. Let's say for a specific region, we had that before when the infection rates went up. So for a specific region, this can be done by the specific state. We saw that in Bavaria, that took relatively strict measures early because they had problems in a few municipalities. But overall, it is an interplay, and this, of course, it makes it a little complex. So there are elections upcoming. So this is, of course, also mixed somewhat with party politics, also with the internal politics of parties about who will be the candidate for a chancellorship. So we have within the single states discussion, and of course also the interplay between the federal level and the state is somewhat biased by political issues which are not really related to COVID, but of course it is taking stock of these COVID measures to position a party or candidate in a specific way. And this, of course, also may become more obvious as longer the crisis takes. I think this is something that evolved from very homogeneous acting and also kind of unity in the beginning, and now these kind of distractions are becoming more obvious.
Jana, so for instance, it's easier to close down, but to reopen, it's more complicated. And I expect that some of the tensions between the federal and the local and the state level, that's where they come up in the decision when to open up some of the sectors that are closed. And how much tension is there, or is it just it's just because we come from such a different system that we fail to understand, or are there tensions around these questions?
As we mentioned, there is a high homogeneity in the state level acting, and that's surprisingly also for us, because normally there is a lot of tension between the state level, but at the moment they are somehow more homogeneous than they had been in former times. And of course they have regional peculiarities, and also the epidemiological situations are different. Not all regions are equally affected by the virus, and that makes it necessary also for the state level to react differently and to have different opinions about how a whole Germany should act. And they normally, the state level is the level where emergency actions to assure public health must be implemented, but they decide together with the central level in Berlin. So there are tensions, of course, but we think they still act together in a good manner.
And maybe if I just may add one idea and one thought. Of course, you talk about reopening and the potential tensions. What we saw, of course, everything which was done, every kind of measure was supplemented by financial help for affected sectors, for affected industries. So of course, and also here, like say the initial conditions matter. It is relatively easy for a wealthy state to provide specific rescue packages, support for specific industries, sectors, groups. So of course, this makes it easier to agree on a measure once you know that there will be supporting measures coming in the aftermath or now directly. So I think this is also a way to smoothen potential conflicts and tensions, like just providing help for the affected groups in the very beginning to ensure the political or the compliance or the agreement within the political process. So, and this is of course, something we observe.
That's true.
How adaptive do you find the administrations, like between the administration, both on the local and state level, between the first and second wave? Is there a feeling that lessons have been learned and that policies are re-examined and changed and being flexible and fluid enough to evolve around the situation? That's one part of the question. The other part of the question is, Germany is so famous for its order and bureaucracy. And the question is, in such a situation where you need to get things done very quickly and sometimes make very rapid decisions, does this not stall some of the processes, or is it just so perfect that it works very smoothly?
So, I mean, it's a clear answer as so. From our own research, surveying municipalities, we know that of course they are adapting, and this, let's say, refers to the internal structures and processes. So they went digital very early, and of course they maintained to work digitally, and they improved their capacities there. So on the micro level, as for the internal adjustments, as well as for, let's say, interaction with the citizens for maintaining their work, much worked well. But on the other hand side, the learning effect, let's say, as for the procurement of public, of medical materials, of mouth nose protection. So of course, much did not take place, despite there were 3-4 months of time now. So some adaptations just went very quickly in the crisis, in the first weeks, first days, one could say, and much innovation could be observed there. But now, interestingly, from this first to the second wave, but this is only anecdotal evidence. We didn't do a second wave of the survey yet. So, but you see, okay, obviously some were like, well, we are doing a good job, and they were just taking the backseat. And now we see, okay, obviously some preparation that would have been useful did not take place. So, Jana, maybe you.
But you can also say that at the macro level, of course, as Rachel said, there's not a lot of learning, some strategy behind it. But of course, they had this financial state aid, and in the first COVID wave, there wasn't that big financial aid, and so they got additional resources for health authorities, and the German armed forces are used for contract tracing. That are also effects that we didn't see that much in the first wave. So they're still improving the system. But the surprising flexibility we see at the most point in the macro level. So at the local level, they are very flexible, they react flexibly, and they, for example, they swift redistribution of their internal personnel, they use digital instruments, and as we can say for public administration in Germany, that's unfortunately not the standard to be so flexible with digital solutions, and we think that's like an eclectic approach. So we have different levels and also different ways of solving these problems.
If I would stop just like a random German citizen in the street, not what we read in, The Economist and Time magazine, but if I would ask the average German citizen, what are you thinking? How is the government coping with the COVID virus? We're ending a year almost of this virus soon. So what would be of course there are various opinions, but at large, what is like the zeitgeist? Because like here in Israel, it's not a very positive, it's very hard to find someone who would say, yeah, they're brilliant. So can you find people in Germany? Are people appreciative of how the administration has been functioning?
I would say the average German would say, well, not brilliant. They would say, well, they're doing okay. And then he or she would start complaining about what's not going well. But this is, you mentioned before, and you mentioned the efficiency and the overall good performance. And of course, we are just coming from a relatively high level. So of course, expectations are high. But on the other hand side, also trust levels in the administration, in the government are high. So people would say, yes, it's going smoothly, it's going well, but I know somebody who had a shop and he didn't receive. So I think as always, people are the majority, even if there are groups like now protesting, but the majority is still satisfied, I would say. But of course, as for specific action of the health authorities, of specific administrations, of course, you will always find somebody who complains for a reason, because as we mentioned, of course, there are still sectors that are not doing that well, which are overburdened. So we can explain why they are not doing or performing efficiently. Let's say for the distribution of state aid, we had like websites that broke down, overburdened administrations that had to give that aid. So of course you will find issues that have to be tackled, because I would say in some, these are the issues that make people unhappy and feel unhappy, lowering trust levels and increasing like the tensions within the societal, political, administrative system in the long run. Yeah. So I think this is something that has to be tackled.
Yeah, but I see it in the same way. So the general trust is at the moment high enough, and hopefully it still will be like that in the future.
What role does civil society play in this setup? Are there specific things that civil society is organizations are pitching in to help the administration, and how cooperative is the administration with, civil initiatives to begin with?
Yeah. Generally, over the last years, we have seen a large increase in civil society helping the state. And as we know from studies in this field, the civil societies also wants to help. But in the COVID-19 crisis, the civil society maybe can help with contact tracing. Some people help the administrations by contact tracing, but there isn't that big place to help, like for example in the refugee crisis, where people could welcome the refugees and they could help them by learning German and so on. But
for instance, what about like elderly people, and there are populations that needs exactly this civil support, and these are the things, like one of the questions that have come up here, people elderly aged homes. What happens in these places? That's where the civil society, I think, comes in, perhaps?
Yes, of course. We also see a lot of organizations rising, like Nachbarschaftshilfe, so they build local groups to help people, like you told, elderly people or other people who need help. Also in these days, we see that there are a lot of organizations who collect money, or also other things like warm clothes for people who live on the street. So there is this big movement of like direct help. Yeah.
It really, I would say it induced, of course, scientific studies are somewhat missing yet, but I would say the increased refugee migration 5 years ago, and now this COVID, this really changed this volunteering structure of Germany. It really induced people to become active. I mean, now due to the nature of the crisis, health crisis, it is harder to apply volunteers. So we see more inter-administrative action. I would say, let's say in about 50% of the German health administrations nowadays, the German army is helping out with contact tracing due to the sensitivity of nature. This cannot easily done by volunteers in all times. So, but we see a kind of change, and this may be something very positive about the crisis. So, because including people are just looking for each other. And this is something, this is a crisis, not of the old, but of the society. But of course, people think about vulnerable and groups. And now it's like, we do it for you. So we see more interaction in a way, and also like those stay-at-home hashtag issues. Like, I think it is a kind of, it is, or it may become a kind of nudge for the overall also civil society to build more on these community approaches and to become active there. And for the administration, of course, this is also important motor or engine of innovation in a way, because now they have to cope with people from different origin, with different backgrounds. They have to become more open to interact in non-formal, non-routine ways. And this in the longer run may also affect the administrative side of the story, becoming more innovative, becoming more flexible. So, and this is what we found. So obviously this innovation makes the administration itself more open, more flexible, because they have to, in a way. You have to leave routines and start something new to address something new.
How much do you think, that the fact that the Chancellor Merkel is a scientist herself, how does this influence her decision-making at large? And how much does this open her up to this innovative approach that you're talking about? And just to add another thought, which can be our summarizing thought, so each of you can give like your last elevator pitch now, and if you want to. But from Israel, it always seems to me that Germany adores, admires, honors science and scientists. Which makes it an easier way to deal with this virus, because there's a culture that is based on science and data in much higher degrees than other places. I think that especially if you compare it right to the United States, where there's a stark difference between the way the administration treated the scientists. But do you think that this is also part of, the resilience, the fact that science is respected, and or maybe you from the academy will tell me that it's not respected and all, and my impression is wrong, but please give me your thoughts in response to that.
I think the systematic thinking of a scientist of course helps in situations which are fluid, which are uncertain. And maybe this is also what Chancellor Merkel helps herself being a scientist, this structural thinking, systematic thinking. And we see that she relies on the knowledge of the scientific community, which is a big community, as you mentioned. That's correct. And I think it's not only the fact that we rely a lot of scientists, but and what they are thinking, but we also see a big networking in the crisis. And I think it's probably the networking aspect which helps to challenge these efforts. And as we can see, the state ministers, so the head of governments of all states, they decide together with the central government, and they have a lot of scientific support by that, mainly by the RKI, the Robert Koch Institute, which is a federal institute within the portfolio of the Federal Ministry of Health. And it's a central institution of the federal government in the field of disease surveillance and prevention. And here we of course have a lot of scientific community and scientific insights. But also for maybe, as you said, the German having culture that is based on data and on scientist thinking, I'm not sure if it helps. Maybe, as you mentioned, in comparison to other countries, we could say that the base level, of course, helps by structural thinking.
And maybe, yeah, I second Jana, and I would say maybe as for Merkel, much comes from her scientific background. Much may also come from her personality. She's a calm and rational person, so she's inclusive in a way, not really maybe in policy making, but inclusive in terms of now she she gives impression that she's listening to the right people, to the well-informed people, and it takes a time until a decision is done, but she gives people like the feeling that things are really thought through. So I guess this is a mixture where she's, in a way, she's perceived as a good crisis manager. We saw that before in the financial crisis, the refugee crisis. But overall, of course, I think it helps that much of the decision making is based on the scientific information, on different. We have the Corona cabinet. We have two Corona cabinets. We have like much discussion based on scientific evidence, and this surely helps to convince people which are not well trained in health issues to think, okay, this sounds plausible and let's obey the rules. So I guess it's a mixture between, as always, between institutional and personal issues that make her and the overall, maybe the Corona politics of Germany relatively successful these days. But we have to wait. We are not, the pandemic is not over yet. And I think learning from experiences from other countries may help, and we see that obviously in some cases things work, and why not to try new instruments and measures even if they are not common to national politics. So
okay. Jana, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think everything is said for this last point, and as Rachel said, we are only at the beginning of the pandemic, and so we can only interpret on what's necessary and what's taken at the moment. So it's only like a picture in this fluid situation. But we hope you got an insight of what we are thinking about German administration, how they deal with the crisis, and that they are relatively successful. That's what we're thinking.
May just last sentence. It has been a while since I was in beautiful Israel, and it was wonderful days. But I guess this also gives us an idea, like cooperation in interviews like now, or our situation here right now may induce kind of cooperation, also research and cooperation in terms of exchange of experience. And I think this is of importance. We just see in how far, also on the European level, how important it may be to induce more cooperation, to induce at least more information sharing. So I think this is something that really also is contributed by like formats like this one, and of course also scientific exchange. So yeah, for us it was wonderful to be here to
it was wonderful to have you. You were both very interesting, and I was happy to have a women panel, female panel. And I do hope, I want to tell you that if we would have the opposite panel on how the Israeli administration is dealing the crisis, it would be less optimistic, less positive in many ways. But it was fascinating. Thank you both for that, and thank you to all whoever watched us. Please join us again next week. We will be exploring the EU administrative response next week, but that has been our second Zoom talk in this series of talks on managing the Corona crisis, perspectives from Germany and the EU. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Shalom.
Shalom. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.